Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Leading our dissection of the Genesys market is 𝗦𝗁_𝗁𝗁, Netacea's Head of Threat Research. Matt is an experienced cyber threat intelligence professional with a Master's in Philosophy from the University of Oxford. In his current role at Netacea, Matt researches and investigates the impact of malicious bots on online businesses and their customers. In his previous role at ReliaQuest, he was the core team analyst working with the world's largest companies in responding to cybersecurity incidents, hunting for undetected attackers, identifying suboptimal practices, and improving security models. If anything is referenced throughout the webinar that you'd like further clarity on, please download the report, which is accessible via the webinar landing page. At the back of the report, you'll find what we hope will be a helpful glossary. And over to you, Matt.
Thanks very much, Danny. So yeah, here today, what we want to talk about is the Genesys market, and it is a topic that's been looked at quite a lot in the past. A lot of organizations have done a bit of a sort of dive into it and examined it and so forth. But over the last few months, we've been keeping our eye on it, and we've seen enough significant changes within it that we definitely think it's worth revisiting and taking another look at. But for those of you who may be less familiar with the Genesys market, I thought it's probably best to start with a bit of a walkthrough of what it is, where it came from, and how it all works. And of course, hopefully then sort of work through the implications of this and the dangers of this to both individuals and to companies. So essentially, to start with, I wanted to introduce you to privacy, anonymity, and anti-detect browsers. So the Genesys market itself is in many ways a sort of solution to a consistent problem that has hit the criminal underworld. So if we take a step back, though, that problem sort of comes from anti-detect browsers. So anti-detect browsers are not themselves illegal. Essentially, they're a sort of souped-up version of incognito mode. So if you know when you're on Chrome and you want to buy a present for your significant other, but you don't want them to see what it is in your browser history or anything like that, you use incognito mode. I'm sure that's the only thing people use it for, definitely nothing else. So that does do a bit to try and reduce the amount of tracking around you. Anti-detect browsers essentially take that and go much further with it. And they avoid the tracking and detection techniques, browser fingerprinting, all of this is that are used by even things like anti-fraud technology. So anti-fraud technology is sort of a way of sort of performing fingerprinting of devices to get a unique sort of identifier for that device. And it's used by banks and other financial services in order to help them detect where fraud may be going on. If they know, for instance, that I'm logging into my bank account and it's not from the computer that I usually log in from, they may get a bit suspicious about that. You know, that if the fingerprint is different, this browser fingerprint is different, they'll look somewhere else. But so these browsers essentially, they were designed specifically to avoid this sort of fingerprinting. And one of the ways to get around it is to dynamically generate fingerprints, so random fingerprints and so forth. And this allows them to bypass some of this anti-fraud technology, at least to some extent. Quite worrying in many ways for anti-fraud efforts, but they were prohibitively expensive, these browsers. You know, the eponymous one, called anti-detect, I think like Google Chrome, it's the anti-detect browser, costs either $600 up front as a one-time cost, if you've got that much money burning a hole in your pocket, or $100 a month, which is considerably more than your average Netflix subscription. Personally, I'd rather use Netflix, but that is just on me. So these browsers, although not specifically designed for criminal activity, often were used for them, but they're quite expensive. The Genesys market is a sort of cheaper solution to this problem. They've sort of courted the market by being able to come in with this cheaper solution, this faster, easier methodology. And what this does is a group of attackers have gone out and created a botnet. This is essentially, they've gone out, infected hundreds of thousands, if not millions of computers all over the world. And these are traditionally, these have been harnessed for things like DDoS attacks, credential stuffing attacks, and so forth. These botnet operators often rent them out to other criminals to launch their attacks, or they use them to launch their own attacks. And at some point, they seem to have come to the realization that they could use these botnet for more. You know, they came up with another way to monetize this product. And they realized that similarly to, you know, the big Facebooks and Googles and stuff, they realized that data is kind of like the new oil. We've got all of this useful information that could be sold. It has a value. And so they realized, hey, if we've got an infection of these computers, we could extract information from them and then sell that. So what they do is they extract the fingerprints from these computers, and also as well as things like stored credentials, browser session, cookies, logged in sessions, that sort of thing. So, if you're logged into your Netflix or your Amazon account or any other sort of online account, Spotify, Amazon, Disney Plus, anything like this, Reddit, any of these accounts, and you're infected by this botnet, it will extract your credentials when you're typing them in, entering them in. It'll extract that information from your browser and stores it, and then puts this together with a fingerprint for your browser for sale on the marketplace. And criminals, can then buy these fingerprints. So it takes these details from these compromised computers and then sells them at sort of almost rock bottom prices, essentially. It goes down as low as less than $1 for one of these bots, as they're called. And you can essentially, by buying these fingerprints, you can then browse the internet using someone else's fingerprints, using someone else's login details. Other browsers, these anti-detect browsers, have since tried to do the same, but they simply can't compete with the scale of the Genesys market's botnets. So that's sort of proved a bit prohibitive for them. So the Genesys market really is the sort of market leader in this area now.
Matt, before you carry on, just one question. The Genesys market, you spoke before about the anti-detect browsers. There are many of them, but what about the actual marketplace itself? Are there other marketplaces like this out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's quite a few of them, in fact, and more botnet operators have realized this is a great way of making money. In fact, I suspect many newer botnets are predominantly they're predominantly designed around this, as it's a fantastic way for criminals to make money. So these other marketplaces have been set up. Some of them have proclaimed themselves as the Genesys market's biggest rival, but that probably tells you how the market is structured, and that people are saying we are the rival to this to this marketplace. So we've got these other botnets that have been set up, and they're extracting the same sort of data. They've essentially copying the Genesys market's model, and they're trying to compete. They're not quite as large. They're not quite as popular. The Genesys market really is the sort of the one that broke into the market first. They pioneered the market. They kind of pioneered the markets. In many ways, they're the largest. They're the most famous. But to be honest, many of these criminals are really quite professional. As I said, they found another way to monetize their product, quite like a legitimate business does. Many of these sort of botnet operators as well do all sorts of additional things that are very professional. So we suspect the Genesys market have a development team, I guess onto their own browser that they've built later. They've got support staff and all sorts of advisories, a wiki that helps people to understand how to use the marketplace and everything. Their competitors have similar sort of tools and so forth for their customers. They're very professional, very smart looking organizations, and I suspect as well the criminals frequenting this are quite often going to be in much the same sort of shoes. The sort of people who are going to be doing this, they're essentially committing digital identity theft. So they're probably going to know what they're doing, and if the sort of people who're not going to get caught easily and already be in prison, they're probably going to be quite careful, and they're going to be aware that, hey, buying all of my stolen identities from one vendor is not a good idea. Vendor diversification is important. We saw recently with, international police forces taking down botnets. If the Genesys market's botnet goes down, they'll lose all of their stolen identities from there. So I suspect these attackers, these criminals, are buying from other marketplaces as well, which will support these marketplaces and gives them more of a reason to exist. And they'll be diversifying there, but nonetheless, the Genesys market is the biggest, the most important in many ways.
Got you.
Cool.
This is the big scary one that we should all be worried about.
Yeah, and in many ways, because it's the biggest, the most popular, it kind of defines the market for the others. The others are, when you look at the others, you can see, well, yes, they are kind of modeled on this and modeled on that. And there may be some bits the Genesys market takes from some of their competitors, but for the most part, it's going to be almost a largely one-way sort of stream of innovation. Which, yeah, so the Genesys market itself, as we've touched on already, is an online marketplace selling stolen digital fingerprints. You go on there if you want to steal someone's digital identity. So it's mostly being used by criminals who want to impersonate other people online. So Danny, if I wanted to look around online for you, I'd want to try and find if your computer had been infected, and if I could buy the bot from there, buy the bot relating to your computer there, and then travel around the internet looking as though I were you. So it's used to buy and sell these bots, but the website also includes a number of other tools which help facilitate the impersonation of other people on the internet. And I think this is probably the most surprising part for a lot of people, is they think, oh, this sort of thing must be buried in the depths of the dark web, you know, where that traditional image you have of ones and zeros across the screen in green, and hackers with their hoods up and sunglasses on in a dark room. In practice, actually, you can get to it on the open web. It's not hard to find. A simple Google search will get you there. It's not even really I would say it's, you know, I was about to say it's kind of like an open secret. It's not even really a secret, to be honest. They're quite open about what they are and what they're doing.
I was just about to ask, how easy is it to find it? And as you say, if you did want to impersonate me on the internet, how might one go about it?
Yeah, so it's fairly easy to find. Getting in is the tricky part. So if I wanted to get in to the marketplace, I say I go to Google, I look for it, I find the correct link, I navigate to the page, and I'm met with what is simply a login page, a account, username and password it's asking for. There's no registration button. So what you need to do is to get an invite to start with. And that invite has to come from someone who is already a member of the Genesys market. And to be a member of the Genesys market, they'll have to have, you know, sort of bought an identity, proven themselves in some sort of way, but been invited by another member. So they can then do that. They can then invite you. So you need to find someone who's already a member of the marketplace and then get an invitation off them, which sounds like it might be a good sort of protection for the marketplace itself, but it's not actually that hard to find the invitations online. A lot of people advertise them. $20, $25, you can buy one off a complete stranger online and use that. Yeah, obviously paid for in Bitcoin rather than actual currency, but you pay in Bitcoin to the value of about $20, $25, and they'll send you an invite, and lo and behold, you're now in the marketplace. So it's rather surprisingly easy to get in many ways. It's not at all hard. And then
easy, you might say.
Yeah, yes, exactly that, criminally easy. So yeah, which kind of brings you on, when you get in, what you'll find is what looks kind of like a fairly simple, easy to see, sort of easy to use sort of catalog of bots and so forth. But the first thing that we noticed, and when we were sort of monitoring the market and so forth, is that since about April 2019, there are only about 100,000 bots on there. So essentially 100,000 compromised computers that were part of the botnet were having their identities sold, their browser fingerprints, their login credentials and so forth were being sold on this marketplace. That's risen now to over 350,000, and we're seeing around 18,000 being added on a monthly basis, which first of all implies a pretty significant growth in the size of the botnet to me, as that growth also is on top of the sort of sold bots as well as a demand for them. As I can't imagine that there'd be this much effort going into listing and pushing these bots on and making them available for sale and so forth if there wasn't some value to them and they weren't being somewhat successful in selling them. So there must be demand for this much product to be available. So as I mentioned, how does someone go about searching for and buying a bot on the Genesys market? So you come into it and you get this, what you can see on the right-hand side of the slide here, this sort of very similar to Amazon sort of product listing when you look at the bots, and you can navigate via all sorts of things. You can see on the sort of left-hand column underneath the bot name heading that the bots have quite a significant name. I wouldn't recommend searching by name. You're probably not going to be able to find the one you're looking for. It's a long, difficult to remember name. But you can also search by things like location. So if you're looking for, as you can see on here, some Canadian bots, you can find them in just about any country in the world, though the Genesys market does explicitly exclude a number of countries, including Russia and other former provinces of the USSR. You can search by the accessible account. So you can see on here, the top one highlighted in blue has credentials available for that poor users, PayPal, Apple Store, Reddit, Wix, what else is on there? Let's see, Spotify, Office 365, LendDirect. So all of those credentials are included in the bot. So if we purchase that bot, we have the information we need to access that individual's PayPal account. And we can also generate a browser fingerprint from them by being able, and that will enable us to essentially sort of impersonate them on there. And you can see these bots are also, we've sorted by price here, and they're about $350 at this point. The pricing is mostly based on the sort of amount and utility of data associated with a bot, with the very simple ones being worth less than $1. So very cheap entry-level bots there, and then you've got your much more advanced ones looking at things like bank accounts, as you can see here with BNC Bank there on the second one down, Netflix being another popular account, HSBC on there. So those ones associated with financial services tend to be worth more, and they can easily rise up to $370 or above. So it is something we've seen. I think most recently we've seen the prices start to increase quite significantly, though, Danny. It's been quite interesting watching that grow.
Yeah. So why do you think that might be?
It's hard to say exactly, but I would suspect it's because they can charge that much for it. People are willing to pay 300. If I were a criminal and I had access to, say, as we can see on here, your HSBC, your BNC Bank, as well as things like your Netflix, Shop Your Way, and so forth, but mostly those two bank accounts. Potentially, I could pay $350, get into your bank accounts, and just clear them out as quick as I can. That would enable me to probably make a pretty good return on those $350. So some people may well be purchasing them in that way, but ultimately, I think the prices are up there, and they've really only risen to that level. Previously, it was mostly up to about $90 we saw. We didn't see much get past about $90 to $100. And now it's last few weeks in particular, it's really started to shoot up quite a lot, and in more numbers than ever before. And really that has indicated to us that there's significantly that people are willing to pay these prices. There must be some sort of desire that they must be able to market them at here. So despite the increase in the number of bots available, the demand seems to be increasing as well, enough to push the prices up, which is in many ways quite worrying for me, as it suggests more people are involved and they're investing more money into these sorts of activities.
Absolutely. It seems like it's indicative of something larger going on in the landscape. What's really interesting is that it's shot up so much so recently. So do you think that means there is some sort of oncoming large scale attack, or do you think it's more indicative that there has been an attack and why there's so much more on the market, the prices have gone up? Maybe it means that there are more bank accounts accessible on the marketplace.
I would suspect it's got more to do with the increased number of bank accounts on the marketplace, which may be because more people have turned to online banking during the pandemic, as banks have been closed. So if you wanted to do any sort of banking activities, you would generally have to do it online. More and more people were making purchases online as well. More and more people have been forced to set up online accounts. A lot of the bots as well that we see, and I think the next slide is a great demonstration of this. So if you click onto that catalog listing, like Amazon or any other e-commerce site, you can see the high-level product details when you search for them, and then you just click in and you get more details. This is the sort of information here that you'll get. And you can see that this device is based in Germany. It's worth about only $56. So it's definitely not one of the more expensive ones, but it's got over 4,000 resources associated with it. And if you look at the known resources here, of which there's 269, just where I'm gesturing with my mouse, I'm not sure if that will show on the screen or not, but you can see there's like WebDE, 46 accounts there, Facebook, 34 accounts, eBay, 16 accounts. That almost suggests that this is possibly a public computer, perhaps in a university or in a library somewhere, some sort of computer that a lot of people have been using, which may suggest that what we're seeing here is multiple different accounts associated with a single device. So that would allow someone who compromises this account, who buys this bot, to take over multiple different devices. So people may have been using public computers increasingly as well to take part in activities that perhaps they weren't able to do so during the pandemic within stores. I think as well, we have seen more and more people turning to online for a lot of this stuff, which has pushed the prices of bots up, because previously, let's say I did all of my banking in person, I never logged in online, my credentials wouldn't have been stored anywhere, couldn't have been picked up even if I were infected. And as a result of that, the bot would have been worth less. Last year, coming in, being forced to do everything online, suddenly I'm putting my bank details in online, and suddenly the bot's able to pick those up and exfiltrate that data back for sale to someone else. So yeah, so you can see we've got sorry, what were you going to say, Danny?
Sorry, I was just going to ask about this, the pricing for bots such as this that have clearly got multiple accounts available within the one place. So is it for, basically you're buying one bot and you're getting countless accounts. So yeah, you get 34 Facebook accounts, and so much information is stored in a Facebook account about an individual, let alone having access to 34 of them. Why do you think, obviously I don't expect you to know the exact answer why this one in particular had this price point, but what can we speculate about the price, it being 56 versus the more expensive $370 price range? Why do you think this is relatively low in comparison, considering what you're getting for the money?
So I would say, I mean, I'm not going to incriminate myself or anything here. I'm not going to say I know exactly why some are worth more than others. I'm definitely, I mean, obviously I'm not doing anything on here illegal or anything like that. This is purely from a research perspective. However, what I would say is, a big part of this reason, I suspect, is simply the nature of the data that's being stored here. So like you say, this is mostly Facebook data. There's a few eBay accounts, there's a couple of PayPal accounts, Betfair, Vodafone, but a lot of these aren't really, a lot of this data isn't really stuff you could use to sort of steal money directly. Essentially, it wouldn't be quite so easy. Whereas the you saw on the previous slide, if I actually just quickly jump back, you can see those are actually bank accounts themselves. So if I get access to your bank account, I can clear out a lot more money there. Part of it comes down to what exactly is the value of each of these points of data that they've gathered, and there is differing amounts of value to them. And I'm not sure how the Genesys market operators calculate that value. I'd be quite interested to know, to be honest, but we're not quite sure at this point. It is an ongoing project. But yeah, I think it's related to the value of each of the different data points they've gathered. So while Facebook information is useful, it can't be used. It's somewhat less useful than, say, direct access to your bank account. I can use that information. I could, say, extract PII from it. I could use that information in future attacks. I could take these credentials and use them in credential stuffing attacks elsewhere to try and get access to further accounts. But ultimately, that's all later stage. I could navigate to Facebook essentially and pretend to be you online and talk to your friends and everything, and ruin all of your friendships. But that's somewhat less valuable to me than, say, just clearing out your bank account.
Absolutely.
Not that I would do that to you, Danny.
No, thank you very much, Matt.
You know where I live, so
And that's the only reason why you won't do it.
Exactly, yes. So yeah, if you did want to make a purchase, hypothetically, all you have to do, just as a sort of warning, please do not do this at home if you're watching. Do not commit crime. As a general rule, we at Netacea do frown on that, and we would never encourage you to do it. So please don't follow these instructions. But as a point of interest, if you just to show how we want to know now how to purchase it. So all I have to do is essentially I have a store wallet. Think of it kind of almost like a gift card. You put the number in, and you then have an amount, say 20 quid or so, assigned to your account. You do the same here, but with Bitcoin. And you load the store wallet with Bitcoin. So I go to somewhere else and I buy, say, into the store wallet. I then find the bot I want, say the one from the previous slide. And then I have a choice of what I want to do with it. I can either add it to my cart if I want to continue browsing through the catalog and find a few bots, if I want to shop around a bit, maybe make a decision later, or, maybe buy multiple bots at once. Or similarly that you see on other e-commerce sites, Amazon, for instance, so you can do a one-click buy option. So, don't even need to faff around with my cart and just click the one-click buy button. Or if I want to make sure no one else takes this bot for a short period of time, I can reserve it. And that reservation, I think, lasts about 30 minutes. And essentially I can say, right, I want to reserve this for 30 minutes and see what sort of happens with it. Maybe I want to buy something else, yada, yada, yada. But I'll reserve it for now and make my decision within the next half hour. And then once I've done that, I simply complete the purchase with the Bitcoin loaded in my wallet. And lo and behold, I now have a bot. I now have your stolen identity, Danny. Which kind of leaves us with, what happens next. So, I've now got your stolen identity, and I like to think of these as kind of like working almost like a mask. And what I need to figure out is how to put the mask on so that when I'm going to net, I look like you. And essentially, what happens is I now keep that bot for as long as the device remains infected, and that includes updates. So I might buy a bot that's very cheap, say less than $1, that's a very new infection. And then that bot may get more and more of your credentials, more and more of your accounts, more and more information needed to generate a browser fingerprint over time. And then it would essentially be increasing in value. So I've sort of invested early into the bot in order to get something worth, say, more like $100 later on. Or, you know, I might just decide, well, I don't want to take the risk that it may not develop into something. I'll just buy something for the $300 margin and just know exactly what I'm getting, sort of thing. But on the whole, generally speaking, you know, you're going to be buying a bot. You're going to know pretty much what's already in there as soon as it's infected. Say I spend the $56 on that German one. I now have that. If more people log into their Facebook on there, I can get more Facebook accounts potentially as it updates, but we'd see what would happen there. And then all I have to do is take that and figure out how to put that mask on. And the Genesys market have been kind enough to develop 2 methodologies for me to do so. The first of these is the Genesys security plugin, and the other is the Genesys Browser. The first of these works exactly like any other plugin for your Chrome browser. So it's a Chromium-based browser plugin. And let's say I load up my Google Chrome, I install the Genesys security plugin. And essentially all I do is I plug the bot into, I load the bot into that plugin and generate a fingerprint from it. And I think the fingerprints are, the first fingerprint for any bot is free and subsequent fingerprints from it cost $1. But load that in there and then simply go out on the internet as per normal. So I've loaded it in. Essentially, I figured out how to put the mask on. And as I navigate around the internet, I look exactly like you, Danny. If you've left your Facebook logged in, I'll be able to just wander around your Facebook account, send insulting messages to all your friends, ruin all your friendships. You'll be there at the one, you know, sat at the pub when we can go back to the pubs with your friends, and they'll be like, "Why are you sending me rude messages right now, Danny?" You know, I can log into your Netflix, completely mess with your algorithm by watching loads of, I don't know, Russian language documentaries or something. You know, all sorts of things like that, navigate into your bank account potentially, if I've got the credentials there. So, you know, I get all of that useful information and just simply navigate around in that manner. The Genesys browser kind of takes this one step further. It works in exactly the same way, but what they've done is they've gone and built their own version of Chrome, essentially, and it is a de-Googled version of Chromium. They've removed all they've taken away sort of the Google sort of stuff and built this sort of almost like a blank version of Chrome essentially, and you plug the security, it comes with the security plugin already installed, and it works exactly the same way. Plug the bot in and off I go, running around the internet looking like someone else. And this browser and this plugin are regularly updated, and you know, we suspect there's a lot of development work gone into this. Certainly browsers are not the easiest thing in the world to keep up to date, to keep working, and obviously for criminal activity, security is a major concern. So I would be working quite hard to, you know, these people work quite hard to make sure that their customers are safe and secure in using the products that they've purchased from them. It's really rather professional little outfit, really, to be honest.
It's enormously professional, and it makes me curious about responsibility, because so far we've covered the browsers. So browser, that's essentially completely bypassed. They created their own, they operate completely off grid. When I say they, I mean the cyber criminals using Genesys market. So yeah, they're operating completely off grid. And then the organizations essentially, as far as they're aware, it's their own users who are coming in and using their own accounts. Consumers may not know at all until it's too late. So where does the responsibility lie? Does it lie with anybody in particular? And if there is something that we can be doing about it, for instance, myself as a consumer who's just had my accounts broken into by your good self impersonating me, what steps should I be taking?
So yeah, so it feels almost bad for me to say responsibility, because ultimately the criminals are sort of responsible for these activities, and they are criminal. And in many ways, you know, the people are, it's not in many ways, it is a simple fact, people are being robbed, their identities are being stolen, they're being robbed. And the organizations who have put measures in to try and stop this sort of thing, but it's very hard, like you said, it's very hard to detect without also blocking actual users. It almost feels like, those movies where someone gets cloned and then the person's there with a gun pointing between the original and the clone and they don't know which is which. Organizations often feel like that dealing with these sorts of attacks. They don't know which one's the legitimate customer. So it is a tough one. And I would say, this is criminal activity, and ultimately the people, both the company and the individuals who are being robbed, are in many ways are frankly the victims of this sort of attack. I think the best way I think to deal with this is, in many ways, sort of prevention is better than cure. The best way not to have your credentials misused is to not have them stolen in the first place. So if you can, make sure you keep antivirus up to date so that you're not getting botnetted. Don't click suspicious links, don't go on dodgy websites, all of those boring things that security professionals say over and over and over again. But really do it's kind of like brushing your teeth. It's a little bit boring, but it is important, and it keeps you healthy and hygienic, and you need to keep doing it, sort of thing. So that's the prevention is better than cure. If you don't get infected with the botnets, then you're not going to get your credentials stolen or anything at all at that point. And the next stage is, if you see suspicious activity on your account, say you start seeing on your Netflix a load of Russian language documentaries being watched, you, rather than just sitting there going, oh, that's a bit odd, I wonder if someone's got in, and not doing anything about it, change your password, monitor keep an eye on the account. Is the activity continuing? Things like Facebook tell you where you're logged in from at any one time. You can check your Facebook and see where am I logged in on. Check those sorts of services. So look for am I logged in from somewhere out in Southeast Asia when I'm living in the UK? Well, that looks a bit suspicious. Maybe I ought to cut that connection, reset my password. Keep an eye on these sorts of things. It's almost like if you were sat at home alone at night and a light went on in a room you're not in. You might go, the light probably shouldn't have gone on in that room. I suspect something's a bit odd. You wouldn't leave it uninvestigated. Same thing here. You see something odd, investigate it, take steps to protect yourself. Your digital identity is just as important as your real one. The next stage to that really is MFA. And although there are MFA bypass methods, they are much, much harder for attackers to do. They are a significant lift in terms of time. So I'd encourage you to turn that on wherever you can. I know it's an inconvenience and it is annoying, but it does help. And that as an individual, that's what we can do. But the other half of your question really was around companies and what steps they can take. And I think that's the next stage is companies need to do everything they can to try and encourage customers to use multi-factor authentication, particularly for things like bank accounts. It is an inconvenience and it does impede on the user experience. I understand that, but ultimately, a bigger impediment to the customer experience is if their bank accounts, all their money gets stolen. That's far worse than having to click a button on your phone. So encourage your users to opt into MFA in any way you can. As a security professional, I prefer to see it compulsory, but I understand that's not always viable, and we need to make things as easy to use as possible. But encourage it where you can. Look for suspicious activity. If someone, generally speaking, if you start seeing user behavioral analytics is quite a useful way around here. If Danny has never watched anything in Russian before and suddenly she's got loads of Russian language documentaries on her streaming account, might want to say, hey, maybe we want to lock this account slightly or send a warning to her and look for suspicious activity, sort of thing. Also look for slip-ups by the attackers. So someone may launch a lot of, while they may be browsing as someone else, they may forget to change their IP. So, if I suddenly start browsing from another country, it might be a bit suspicious. If I'm logged into the same account from 2 different locations at once, again, that's a bit suspicious. So there's all this sort of suspicious stuff and that can give things away and can be that sort of easy tell to try and help protect. But it is difficult. I'm not going to lie, even for both individuals and companies. And it's more about trying to do all of these little things. And as we do more and more of these things, we've got more and more chances to catch these attackers. That sort of defense in depth gives us more protection.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I can see why we're starting to see companies like Netflix talk about multi-factor authentication, because at the moment, they've got very validly customers sharing passwords between, obviously not validly between households, but between families, say. However, if you're then thinking about the location of a device and they need, you need to work out who is legitimately using that password, it becomes very difficult to actually track who is a legitimate user and who is illegitimate, because essentially it's all the functionality that Netflix has been designed to carry out, and criminals are just exploiting it for their own means, and it's all there essentially for the taking, and it just needs, what we need to be doing is making it harder for them to carry it out.
Absolutely, yeah. It's about making it harder, because ultimately, as we've been talking about, these guys are professional, they're businesses. And if we can make their business model no longer viable or far too difficult to implement or more expensive to implement, it's going to drive them out of the marketplace. They may start looking in other avenues of trying to make money and just completely get out of this. In an ideal world, I'm not sure that would ever realistically happen, but if we can make it harder, we can at least increase the barrier to entry. And it's that sort of, that defense in depth is really the key to that, using all these different techniques, looking for all these different tells, and that sort of team effort, that team approach to it from both us as individuals and the companies who we entrust with our information and from whom we purchase services. We've got to work with them.
Absolutely. It's the same as, if you don't want your bank account details to get stolen, don't leave them lying around in the coffee shop.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, one thing organizations could do, because there's always the worry that if we tell someone about a security issue, hey, we've seen suspicious activity on your account, they're going to panic and potentially unnecessarily and so forth. And I think we kind of need to get away, try and sort of encourage not society as a whole, really, people as a whole, to try and move away from that. Okay, there's suspicious activity on my account, I need to panic, cut all ties with that company. So not at all. No, we need to encourage people to say, hey, we've seen you watching a lot of Russian language documentaries. We've not seen that in the past. Can you confirm that this was you and it's not someone misusing your account? And if you've just got a gentle email like that, say something like that, and you're like aware and conscious that, hey, this could mean something bad, but it may not be anything at all if I have been legitimately watching them. But you could say, hey, no, that wasn't me. And then, so the streaming service could take you through steps to try and help you to protect your account and protect yourself. And that's good for everyone, really. It's good for you. It's good for the organization, because they prevent the attack before it's actually started. And then they don't have to go through the whole rigmarole of trying to repatriate the account to you and deal with all sorts of sort of chargebacks or anything if credit cards have been used and stolen in that way. So yeah, so I think really the key three takeaways I have here are that we need to remember that these markets like the Genesys market, and it's not just the Genesys market, but the Genesys market is really the big one. But markets like this one facilitate account takeover attacks and fraud activities. They are a sort of cheap, they found a way to provide a cheaper solution to that problem for attackers, and attackers have jumped onto this as a way to launch these attacks. They've significantly reduced the cost and made it a lot easier. Now I don't need to write malware, go out, steal someone, figure out a way of build a key. I don't need to build a keylogger. Then I don't need to build some way of delivering that keylogger to Danny, and then figure out some way of getting information from the keylogger back to my computer, and then use that to launch an attack. Instead, I can just buy that online. It's really made it a sort of a much easier entry place to the market. And as a result of this, we're seeing these markets really growing in scale, and we're seeing it. And I suspect we're really going to see an increase in the number of these attacks and the risks and dangers posed by them. And we really need to try and get ahead of this before it gets worse.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Thank you too, Danny.
I think people may be equally alarmed and hopefully informed at the end of that dissection of the Genesys market. Hopefully those takeaways were useful, and if any of you would like to know more about the Genesys market, then please do download the report following today's webinar. Matt and his team are also carrying out research, continuing to carry out their research into various bot marketplaces, including the Genesys market. So if anyone would like to get in touch with them about collaborating on these projects, if you have anything to share with the team or would like to just continue the conversation with Matt about bot marketplaces, please do get in touch with him at matthew.gracymcmin@netacea.com. Alternatively, please do feel free to get in touch with any of us here at Netacea about your own current bot strategy and keeping your customers protected at hello@netacea.com. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope you found this useful.
Thanks everyone.